Meeting the love of your life, breaking free from parental control, and getting married. This is what most teenage girls dream of. Caroline Crouch was no different from her peers when, at a young age, she fell in love with a 27-year-old pilot who flew a helicopter over her school. The handsome adult man named Babis Anagnostopoulos captured the heart of the young girl when she was just 15 years old. They started dating. And when Caroline turned 18, the lovers ran off to Portugal and got married. No one could have imagined that this perfect fairy tale would end in tragedy. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. On Tuesday, May 11th, 2021, at 4:30 a.m., Babis woke up to find his home under attack. He, his wife, and their little daughter were renting a 2-story stone house in the suburb of Glika Nera, a district located on the outskirts of Athens, Greece. Babis didn't have time to fight back, as 3 men, concealing their identities under hoods, pounced on him and, while he was still groggy from sleep, easily overpowered him. The intruders were armed with pistols. Wasting no time, they tied up the homeowner, taping his eyes and mouth shut with duct tape. So he could do nothing when the strangers attacked his wife, 19-year-old Caroline. The entire incident woke their 11-month-old daughter, who was sleeping nearby in her crib. The criminals, speaking with Greek and Albanian accents, repeatedly demanded to know where the money was, but Caroline didn't know. What started as a typical robbery ended with the death of Babis's young wife. Caroline Crouch was born on July 12, 2001, in Athens, to a retired engineer, David Crouch, and his wife, Susan Della Cuesta. When she was just 8 years old, the family moved to the island of Alonissos, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea. This girl grew up and graduated from high school. Her parents loved the coastal surroundings, and Caroline enjoyed life on the beach and took a serious interest in scuba diving. Caroline met her future husband during a Friday parade in 2017, when Babis was a commercial helicopter pilot and Caroline was just an ordinary schoolgirl. 3 years later, they got married. A few days before the robbery, Babis and Caroline bought a plot of land where they planned to build their dream home for themselves and their little daughter. Her parents wanted to help Caroline and gave her a generous gift, 50,000 euros, which the girl spent on purchasing the plot. The couple also had 10,000 euros set aside for construction expenses. The spouses kept the money at home, in a hidden spot. The Greek public at the time didn't particularly trust banks, as they were constantly at risk of bankruptcy. In light of such circumstances, it was common for the general public to keep cash in their homes, as it was considered a safer option. Caroline and her husband likely held a similar view and kept all their savings at home, never expecting their residence might be targeted for a robbery. On May 11th, 2021, when his wife started screaming, Babis couldn't take it anymore and told the intruders where the money was hidden. The men opened a box containing the board game Monopoly and scooped out all the cash the couple had saved for building their dream home. But even that didn't seem enough for them. The criminals kept roaming from room to room, stealing jewelry and other items that held any value. The robbers wanted more, but Babis and Caroline had given them everything they had, and now, in desperation and fear, they begged to be spared and for their little daughter to be left unharmed. The man heard his wife's screams as the intruders pointed a firearm at their 11-month-old baby. His eyes were taped shut, but he could feel the fear for her daughter's life that Caroline was experiencing. Beyond the taped eyes, the rope around his neck was tightened to such a degree that he periodically lost consciousness and slipped into oblivion. Eventually, Babis passed out completely. Coming to amid the grim silence that filled the house, he realized the robbers were gone. The only thing that pulled him out of the darkness was the desperate cries of his little daughter. The man didn't know what had happened, where his wife was, or whether any harm had come to the baby. By his internal sense, he had been unconscious for about half an hour. Somehow, with great effort, Babis managed to reach his mobile phone and dial the emergency services number with his nose. As soon as the dispatcher answered, the man tried to explain the situation. Given that his mouth was taped shut, his voice sounded very muffled, and the operator didn't immediately make out the words. It took an hour and a half from the time the intruders burst into the couple's residence before emergency response personnel arrived at the scene. Around 6 in the morning, they rushed down the stairs, entered the house, and were stunned by the sight before them. All the living spaces, the kitchen, and the bathroom were trashed. Drawers were completely emptied onto the floor, clothes and other belongings scattered throughout the space. And atop it all lay an open Monopoly game box, the very box where Babis and Caroline had hidden their money. The emergency response team immediately noticed a security camera lying on the living room couch. It looked as though it had been ripped from the wall and tossed onto the sofa. The memory card was missing. It wasn't among the items strewn about the house. The next scene shocked the police. On the staircase, hanging by its own leash, was a white and brown husky puppy. It was unclear why the criminals felt the need to strangle the dog. It was still so young. Babis was found on the floor in the master bedroom. His eyes and mouth were sealed with duct tape that reached down to his neck, and a rope bound his hands and feet behind his back. Caroline lay on the bed. Her little daughter was beside her. The girl was crying and clapping her hands, trying to wake her mom. The baby herself was unharmed, though her condition left much to be desired. Caroline Crouch was declared dead. Doctors examined the young woman's pale skin and concluded that her death had been violent. Law enforcement officers freed the homeowner from the ropes and removed the tape. When Babis saw the lifeless body of his wife, the woman he had been in love with for the past 5 years, he rushed to Caroline and began to scream. The grief-stricken man couldn't believe his beloved was no longer alive. After ensuring the infant's safety, the police began questioning Babis. According to his version of events, 4 men were involved in the attack. 3 of them entered the house, while the 4th stood watch outside. The sequence went like this. One robber approached the house via a dirt road that led to the back entrance. Since breaking it open didn't work, he removed the security pins from a basement window and climbed inside. First, the intruder took out Roxy, the couple's 7-month-old husky, by hanging her over the staircase with her leash. Perhaps the criminal feared the dog would make noise and prevent them from sneaking into the house unnoticed. After that, he let in 2 more accomplices by opening the door from the inside. Then, the 3 of them headed to the master bedroom, where Caroline, Babis, and their little daughter were. After learning where the money was kept, the robbers pulled the cash from the box and turned the entire house upside down, looking for other valuables. And before leaving, they returned to the bedroom and smothered Caroline with a pillow. At that moment, Babis was unconscious from the tightly tied rope around his throat. The intruders might have assumed he was dead and left, thinking they hadn't left a single witness behind. However, it turned out that Caroline's death wasn't instantaneous. The 19-year-old young woman endured an attack that lasted about 6 minutes. This was evidenced by bruises all over her body and defensive wounds on her arms and legs. Bruises on her lips and tongue hinted at the possible use of some sharp objects. There were no signs of assault. Though the damage inflicted on the couple's home was immense, the intruders left no concrete evidence behind. The only thing the police found in the house was the hood of one of the criminals. Based on how Babis described the events, it was concluded that the hood must have fallen off when the homeowner put up a fight. And yet, the dropped hood was enough to provide a minimal idea of what one of the attackers looked like. Babis described him as a tall, dark-skinned man with excess weight. Relying on the eyewitnesses' recollections, experts compiled a rough sketch. Though the head of the household was disoriented, he managed to identify 2 firearms the criminals used to threaten the homeowners. According to Babis, they had a black pistol and a silver Colt. Investigation details revealed that the intruders got away with 10,000 euros in cash and jewelry worth 20,000 euros. The police also concluded that professionals were at work, not breaking into a random house, but observing this specific family and waiting for the right moment to strike. Authorities classified the attack on Caroline as an act of brutal violence. It could have been the actions of someone with pronounced antisocial tendencies and a lack of emotion. Questions immediately arose. If the robbery achieved its goal, why take the young woman's life? What was the motive for her killing? Could the criminals have been under the influence of illegal substances, unable to control their actions, even though they managed to escape, leaving almost no evidence? Or perhaps Caroline saw their faces and recognized them. For a time, Crouch had trained in martial arts. Given her level of physical fitness, it's reasonable to assume she fought back with all her strength. But standing up to 3 grown men was no easy task for a young girl. Most likely, the intruders had to silence her to keep things under control. Caroline started screaming when one of the attackers pointed a gun at her daughter. Any normal mother would stand to the last to protect her child. And to cool the woman's defiance, the robbers might have killed her. In general, investigators had many different theories, but they were all just assumptions. The police were certain of one thing: the attack on the couple was premeditated. The intruders knew exactly where money was hidden in the house. The gang might have gotten a tip from someone the couple knew. That's what the police had to figure out. During the investigation, they also reviewed footage from surveillance cameras at nearby homes and businesses. In the recorded material, detectives identified a dark-colored car followed by a motorcycle. The vehicles were circling around the couple's house that early morning, but tracking where they went afterward proved impossible. Caroline Crouch was buried 3 days after her death. Her burial took place on the Greek island of Alonissos, the place where she spent her childhood and youth. Babis paid tribute to his wife, recounting how lucky he was to have met her on his path. He had been happy all those years because his beloved was by his side. The grief-stricken man now found solace in the fact that their daughter, a piece of Caroline, remained with him. While loved ones said goodbye to the deceased, a car was stopped for a routine document check in northeastern Greece. Inside was a 43-year-old Georgian citizen heading toward the Bulgarian border. During the document check, the officer noticed the passport was clearly fake. Soon, this man was identified as Georgi Karadzeshvili, a violent criminal with multiple prior convictions. He was wanted for 12 burglaries committed across Athens over the past 6 months. But the police were interested in something else. Several of the crimes had taken place in the area where Babis and Caroline lived. One of them occurred in December, when Karadzeshvili and 3 accomplices broke into a house through a rear window. They attacked a woman and, threatening her with a knife, stole money and jewelry totaling 10,000 euros. The next attack happened on March 7th, just 2 months before Babis and Caroline were targeted. These incidents matched in many details. And finally, the last piece. The captured robber's appearance suspiciously matched the sketch compiled from the husband's description of the victim. Thus, the police had evidence gathered against Karadzeshvili, including a history of violent break-ins, an attempt to flee the country, and a resemblance to the sketch. The police were almost certain they had found the right man. He was arrested and placed in custody. And though the criminal was pressured not only mentally, but also physically, which is a violation of rights, he, even despite a concussion, maintained his stance and claimed he had never heard of Caroline Crouch. The evidence the police had against this man wasn't enough to charge him with the crime, and Karadzeshvili walked free. However, as a result, 3 police officers were fired, and several others were demoted. Continuing the investigation, the police turned their focus to a local Albanian organized crime group. Initially, they had a list of 100 people, which later narrowed to 10. Babis was shown photos of each potential criminal from this group of 10, but he couldn't identify any of them. Solving the case required more time. A reward of 300,000 euros was offered for information leading to the capture of the robbers. But no one knew anything about Caroline's case, and the substantial cash reward went unclaimed. By then, Athens residents were living in fear, unsure who might be the next victim. Media reports stated that the attack on Caroline was an unprecedented case where the criminals left absolutely no evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints. Despite the lack of results, the Crouch family and Babis Anagnostopoulos were grateful to law enforcement for their efforts to unravel the complex case. The husband of the deceased supported the police's efforts and continued speaking to the media to keep Caroline's case from being forgotten. Babis was also active on social media, answering questions and thanking people for their ongoing support. A breakthrough came on June 17th, 37 days after Caroline was brutally killed. On the island of Alonissos, the young woman's loved ones held a small memorial service. Many noticed several police officers among those present, and a police helicopter stood on a vacant lot near the cemetery. Investigators waited until the event concluded, then discreetly approached Babis and asked him to accompany them to Athens, as new information had emerged in the case. The man needed to identify a suspect, and the now widower agreed, unaware of what lay ahead. By that point, investigators had considered numerous theories and analyzed key details from the night Caroline was killed. Those details didn't add up. Babis told the police the intruders broke in through a basement window, but that window turned out to be very small. Given the assumed large build of the suspect, it followed that the basement window couldn't have been the entry point. Babis also insisted the house had been trashed by the robbers. However, neighbors told the police that no suspicious sounds came from the house that night. No commotion, no barking dog, no cries for help, no babies' wails. As it turned out, the memory card from the security cameras had indeed been removed, but data from the device showed it was taken out at 1:20 a.m., hours before the criminals supposedly entered the house. Additional details came from the fact that Caroline wore a smartwatch that tracked her pulse. Readings at 3:58 a.m. indicated she was asleep, but by 4:05, her pulse spiked by 50%, suggesting severe physical and emotional stress. Caroline's heart stopped at 4:11 a.m., and this happened before Babis claimed their home was attacked. The man himself had a fitness app on his smartphone. Data from that program showed he was moving around at a time when he was supposedly tied up. Detectives even tried to recreate how a bound homeowner could dial emergency services, but no one managed to do it with a taped face. The investigation revealed that Caroline had tried to book a hotel room for herself and her daughter that night. A text message sent to a friend also showed the young woman planned to leave her husband. In the early years of their marriage, Caroline studied at a college in Athens, while Babis continued working as a pilot. They were both active on social media, sharing glimpses of a happy family life. Judging by their social media accounts, the couple had a relationship filled with love and romance. However, the story in Caroline's personal diary belonged to an entirely different genre. There, the girl often questioned her relationship with this man. In 2019, she wrote about a serious argument and mentioned wanting to leave Babis and go to her sister. Her husband increasingly resorted to manipulation. He became obsessed with control. Babis wanted to isolate his wife from everyone, but not every girl is willing to turn into a housewife at 19. Caroline was a university student and didn't earn money. Her mom sometimes sent her some, but Babis immediately took the money so his wife wouldn't be tempted by anything. In her diary, the girl wrote that she loved Babis so much she couldn't leave him, even though the relationship caused her pain. Her attempts to end the marriage continued even after she became pregnant. But Caroline stayed. She wanted her child to grow up in a complete family. The personal diary revealed to detectives the young woman's clear intent to leave her husband. What began as a fairy tale love story turned into an abyss for Caroline, filled with pain, horror, and despair from which she couldn't escape. Investigators informed Babis that he was suspected of killing his own wife. They interrogated him for 8 hours before he broke down and confessed to taking Caroline's life. The man claimed they argued because his wife wanted to take their daughter and leave. He lost control when his spouse was the first to turn to physical violence. She threw the baby into the crib and attacked her husband with her fists. Babies claimed that at that moment, his mind went blank. He pushed Caroline onto the bed, pressed a pillow to her face, and leaned on her with his full body weight. He took the life of his child's mother right in front of their 11-month-old baby. At first, the man wanted to dispose of the body but realized it was impossible. Then it occurred to him to stage a home invasion, and to make it believable, he even killed Roxy, the 7-month-old husky. After all, no one would think he could harm his own pet. Then Babies placed his daughter next to his wife's lifeless body. He wrapped himself in duct tape, called the police, and tied his hands and feet with rope. Babies was so confident he'd get away with the crime that he didn't bother destroying key evidence. In May 2022, he was charged with murder committed in the heat of passion, obstructing justice, giving false testimony, and animal cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, plus an additional 10 years for hanging the dog, along with a fine of 20,000 euros. The Crouch family gained custody of Babas and Caroline's daughter. Now, the girl will have to grow up without the closest person in the world, and that's deeply saddening. No matter how hard criminals try to evade justice, retribution will catch up with them sooner or later, and excessive confidence will only hasten the reckoning for their sins. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.